result out of the blue because it was such an unexpected result.
Yeah, and that was back in 2012. So all
May
this
2012, yeah.
So all this time you've been trying to fight to establish his innocence.
Yeah, I mean, it was the original tribunal case was actually done in February 2013, to which the judge said that he was unfairly dismissed, and it was breach of contract. But unfortunately, First Bus appealed a couple of times, which is why it's dragged on so long.
Right. I mean, when he proved his innocence, how did he do it? He took what sort of test did he do to see that?
He had a hair follicle test. He was advised by his doctor that it was the gold standard of test. It's widely recognised in the courts. It can't be tampered with because obviously it shows what is in your body.
Right. So that showed he was in the clear.
That showed it was negative for cocaine and its metabolites for 90 days. That test was done at the end of June, which the swab test was carried out about the 24th, 25th of May, I think, so that date was more than covered.
Right. So how did he pick it up? I mean, where about this idea that he got it from contaminated banknotes? What do you know about that?
Well, the contamination of banknotes is quite widely known, and it was actually, it's known by First Bus themselves. It was brought up by them. We got an article which was done by the Mail Online that says it was 88% of notes are contaminated. We had an expert witness report that looked at the swab saliva test results that are done, and he confirmed that it was just a simple case of sample contamination.
Right. How is he now and how are things?
We're gradually trying to get back to normal now. The case is all finished, thankfully. He's received the compensation that was due to him. We're trying to put it behind us now and just move on with our lives, but because it is such a strong story, I'm sure Alan isn't the only one that this has happened to.
Yeah.
It needs to be made public. Whilst I can appreciate that tests are necessary, of course they're necessary. I'm not saying they're not.
They've got to be right, haven't they?
Of course they have.
Yeah.
I mean, when we went to the tribunal, First Bus stated that the tests, that they are done on drivers randomly, but they are predominantly carried out before a shift starts. So they're not handling banknotes. Alan's was carried out midway through a shift. Been handling notes all morning, paid them into the cash machine, eating his sandwiches without washing his hands, and obviously the result come back very unexpected.
Yeah, okay, but that's very interesting. Thank you for that, Rita.
No
Our first group statement says, we take the safety of our passenger staff and road users incredibly seriously, and as such have stringent drug and alcohol testing for all employees. We randomly test individuals in line with company policy, as well as acting when there are grounds for suspicion over misuse. While it would be inappropriate to comment on the final details of this individual case, we believe we followed due process throughout. So what are the implications of all this? We're going to talk to a couple of people, somebody about forensic testing, and first of all to Alison Ashworth, Head of Motoring at Forster Dean Solicitors. So these roadside tests are based on these swabs. Can we trust them is the question, Alison. This kind of throws a question mark over them, doesn't it?
Yes, it certainly does. The roadside testing devices themselves, which have been type approved, they've gone through a rigorous testing procedure and have to meet certain standards. But even then, they're still not. You still wouldn't be able to secure a conviction on the basis of a roadside sample because they're simply not accurate enough. In order to convict somebody under the legislation for drug driving, a blood sample would need to be provided at the police station. So yes, there are real significant issues over the reliability of these roadside devices. They simply show up the presence of a drug inside a person's system.
Yeah, but as you say, I mean, although it's not infallible, then you do, when it comes to being taken to court, there would be a blood test as well, which would be more accurate.
Yes, certainly. It's the more accurate blood test that the prosecution rely on.
Right.
So they simply show up the presence of a possible...
Well, in a way then, does it, I mean, do you still think, would you still say, look, we can't go ahead with these roadside tests, or do you think, I mean, they're obviously a useful indicator of the presence of drugs, and then you get to the truth a bit later?
Yeah, they're an indicator of the presence of drugs, and they make it easier for the police instead of having to prove impairment as they did with the old law.
Yeah.
But the tests themselves are not infallible, and even the Greater Manchester Police, they've delayed the implementation of the new law until they're fully trained on these new devices. So even the police are delaying the implementation.
Right.
So when we've got companies like the bus companies, their devices haven't been type approved, and they are probably going to be less reliable than the ones that the police are delaying the implementation of. So it's just not standardised, and they're just not reliable enough to warrant somebody being sacked from their employment.
Absolutely, I get that point. And then the other point, which you probably don't know anything about this, but I'm slightly bemused by the number of banknotes which apparently have cocaine on them.
It's surprising that there is a huge amount of cocaine in circulation, as is evidenced by the amount on banknotes. But what's more surprising is, of course, that now that cocaine is covered under this new law in specified limits, I imagine there's going to be far more people than was originally anticipated who will be affected by this new legislation and will now have to very carefully rethink their general habits in order to make sure they're safe to drive.
Right, yeah, thank you. Thank you. That's Alison Ashworth. Paul Hunter is Managing Director of Forensic Testing Service, which specialises in drug and alcohol testing. Hi, Paul.
Hello there.
I just actually got a text before I turn to you. It's counting machines which cross-contaminate the notes, says one texter, which, they're kind of automatic machines, perhaps the way they flick the notes scatters the powder all around, but it's quite a story. So, Paul, roadside tests are fallible.
I think that's that's fair to say. I think that the challenge really at the roadside is knowing at what point you can convict somebody, because at the moment I believe the legislation covers a number of specified drugs, and if you're taking one of those drugs and it's found to be over a certain level, and they're looking to secure a conviction, there are an awful lot of drugs used out there. Most of the testing that we do is in civil cases. We're looking at child safety and testing people with who may be at risk of using drugs. And we find that frequently we're picking up drugs that have been abused that are not part of this legislation. And I think also the fact that I think it was just raised by the solicitor we just listened to earlier. The fact that you can't convict them on the basis of the roadside test, you need to then go and obtain a second sample, and that's where the problem arises, because these drugs don't last very long in the system. So the delay between obtaining the initial sample at the roadside and obtaining a sample that then is going to be used for the conviction, it needs to be a matter of minutes, and it's more
Minutes. So, if you arrested somebody on the basis of one of these tests, if you didn't get a test done within a couple of hours, then they might well be in the clear anyway, because it's worked its way through the system.
It's very likely. If you look at some of these drugs, they stay in the system for around about 12 to 24 hours, and metabolism can vary. A pregnant woman can metabolize a drug twice as quickly
Really?
on Esther as...
Well, what about this thing that it turns up in the hair all the time, or is that just too complex a test to do for most people?
They tell us very different things. Obtaining an oral swab at the roadside is telling you what is in the blood at the time
At that moment,
that sample. The hair is giving us a very...
This is what you've been doing over the last 3 months, sort of thing.
Over the last month, 2 months, depending on the length of the hair that you test.
Yeah.
I think in terms of securing a conviction, then clearly the sample that's collected at the roadside should be the sample that goes to the laboratory.
Yeah, well, you have to indicate that the person was unable to drive at that moment, not that he'd taken drugs 2 months earlier. So, so the roadside swab is not effective. The blood test is more reliable, but you've got to get it done quickly. So this is not going to be an easy process, is it, to make work properly?
Well, no, it isn't. I think the fact, people are saying it needs to be a blood test, that's not necessarily the case. If an appropriate oral transudate sample is collected at the roadside, that can be both tested rapidly if necessary, but more importantly, it can then go to a laboratory and can be analysed for a broad range of substances that can impair, and not just a very restricted range that will be detected at the roadside, and more reliably, because that can be then quantified accurately.
Right.
At the point at which they were stopped.
Yeah. I'm obviously not uninformed on these matters, but I wasn't aware that banknotes were so commonly contaminated. Most of them seem to have some cocaine on somewhere.
Absolutely. It depends where you are in the country. It depends how long a life that particular banknote has had in circulation. But yes, anything between little as 5%. If you take a sample, or it could be up to 90% of the notes are contaminated, and to varying levels. I think the problem with cocaine is that it so readily contaminates environments where it's used or handled, and is readily spread around. The issue we heard very early on in this discussion, where somebody was convicted of using cocaine on the basis of handling banknotes, the problem is not so much whether you find cocaine in the sample, it's whether or not you can then determine whether that cocaine has been in the body, or whether it's due to a contamination. I think the problem we have generally is that we assume a positive drug test is a drug user, and we can't assume that, whether it be blood, oral fluid, or indeed hair tests. We need to look at other components that are produced and the levels of those components, and look at their exposure profiles, because we are living in environments where a lot of drug use is being carried out, and we will be exposed to it.
Right, thank you very much indeed, Paul. Interesting stuff. One quick text on this. Tony says, my wife was enjoying an evening out with friends in Newcastle under Lyme. She took part in the voluntary police drug test. Her mid-40s mum of 3, and I know she's never been near drugs deliberately, but she was found to have been in contact with something that showed up drugs on her hand. Drug testing like this is misleading and